Done that. Done it already.
So, hello everybody. I had an issue of trying to dumb down a presentation for work for beginners, people who didn't know a lot about the assassination. I've now had the challenge of dumbing it up for all of you, so that's pretty much why it was a last minute thing that I got it to Neil. But we'll give it a go, and hopefully it's not too rudimentary. Okay. So the title there is somewhat flippant, but I am making a serious point. I think we all agree that single bullet theory is nonsense. For most people, it is the number one reason to suspect a conspiracy, because without it, by definition, there has to be another shooter. I'm not sure if it's politically correct now to say gunman, but I'll digress. But why is it nonsense? And what are some of the rebuttals to critics? That is what I want to focus on today, because it is no good making a case and then not being able to defend it. That's what started this mess in the first place with the Warren report. Before I start properly, I also want to give due recognition to Pat Spear, Martin Hay and Jeremy Bourgeois. It is their inspiration, research and writing upon much of this presentation is based. So what do I mean by bad science? Those aren't just a couple of words, random words thrown together, rather there is a specific definition. Bad science, sometimes referred to as junk science, is defined as research, theories or assertions that claim to be scientific but lack sufficient evidence, rely on faulty methodology or demonstrate bias. As we know, this case is riddled with misinformation and cherry-picking of results to support a favoured hypothesis as people try to fit square blocks into round holes. We should stay away from that, and I'm going to try to do it here. The definition of science itself is predicated on observation, experimentation and the testing of theories against evidence. We all learned the scientific method when we were at school. Observe, question, hypothesize, predict, test and then analyse results and reach a conclusion. But if you have a preordained endpoint that you want to get to, it's not scientific to bend, force or in some cases break the evidence to reach it. It's as bad as cheating at competitive sport. What does it mean to actually win if you haven't played by the rules? It's worthless and self-defeating. So let's move to a quick overview of the single bullet theory itself before we move on to what is wrong with it, then the arguments and counterclaims. The single bullet theory posits that a projectile hit President Kennedy from the rear, then exited from the front before entering Governor Connolly's back, leaving through his chest, breaking the right wrist and ended up in his left thigh. Here's the path. The single assassin theory needs this to be true because it believes there were only 3 shots fired. One is the fatal head wound and the other is accounted for by the injury to bystander James Tague that had to be a miss. Because of this, some have even gone as far to suggest that it's not a theory at all. They've moved to start talking about single bullet fact, because they say it's been proved by computer technology. But we'll get to that. Why do people doubt the single bullet? Where do you start? Let's go with the Zapruder film. The film shows President Kennedy emerging from behind a road sign at about frame 225 with his hands reaching to his throat.
He's 215?
No, 225.
Oh. Okay.
He's clearly been shot by this point. The Warren Commission states that this happened 2/3 of a second earlier at frame 210, the instant in which he became visible from the easternmost 6th floor window of the book depository after being hidden behind an oak tree. Governor Connolly, however, shows no sign of being shot in the back until 2/3 of a second later, at about frame 238, when he starts to twist and fall to his left. That's 238. This bullet arrived much too late to have been the one which wounded Kennedy, and much too early for both to have been fired from the rifle attributed to Oswald. That's because it takes too long at least 2 seconds to recycle the Mannlicher Carcano between shots. And Governor Connolly's own testimony supports that. Quote, "One bullet caused the President's first wound and an entirely separate shot struck me. It is a certainty I will never change my mind." Indeed, he maintained for the rest of his life that he was struck by a separate bullet after Kennedy had already been wounded. Similarly, his wife Nellie, sat right next to him in the car, stated, "I turned over my right shoulder and looked back and saw the President as he had both hands at his neck. Then very soon there was the second shot that hit John." And the Zapruder film also supports that. It shows Connolly holding his Stetson hat in his right hand after Kennedy comes into view while clutching at his throat. As late as frame 268, which is that one, more than 2 seconds after frame 225, Connolly's hand is gripping his hat tightly, his shirt cuff white and free of blood. Clearly he's not been hit by the bullet which clipped the end of his jacket sleeve, passed through his shirt cuff, then shattered the radius bone in his wrist and severed the tendon by his thumb. Connolly's surgeons also cast doubt on this scenario, but we'll come back to that when we look at the actual bullet in evidence that is supposed to have done all the damage. Now, so far the impact on the President has been somewhat conspicuous in its absence, so let's remedy that. We did already cover when JFK was hit, but where he was hit is now the key. The death certificate signed by Dr. George Berkeley, the President's personal doctor, who was present both in the emergency room at the hospital in Dallas and at the autopsy at Bethesda Naval Hospital in Maryland, located the back wound at about the level of the third thoracic vertebrae, or T3, which is typically 4 to 6 inches or 10 to 15 centimetres below the top of the shirt collar. The only surviving contemporary report of the autopsy by FBI agents Sibbett and O'Neill also supports this location when it describes a bullet hole which was below the shoulders and 2 inches to the right of the middle line of the spinal column. The FBI report goes on to contradict 2 other essential elements of the single bullet theory. It was determined that the trajectory of the missile entering at this point had entered a downward position of 45 to 60 degrees. Further probing determined that the distance travelled by this missile was a short distance in so much as the end of the opening could be felt with the finger. So basically it didn't go anywhere. The autopsy face sheet, this one, made by one of the pathologists during the autopsy, was the official diagram of the wounds to the body. It too placed the back wound in this location, and it was later verified by Dr. Berkeley. Secret Service agent Clint Hill also supports this position. He told the Warren Commission that, quote, "I saw an opening in the back about 6 inches below the neckline to the right-hand side of the spinal column." And of course the clincher is the autopsy photograph from the rear that clearly shows the wound lower in the back from the level of the shoulders.
It's very close to the spine, too.
So the back itself and the back of both Kennedy's jacket and shirt each contained a bullet hole approximately located between 5 and 6 inches below the top of the collar. Although the jacket had bunched up slightly from time to time during the motorcade as Kennedy waved to the crowd, it never bunched sufficiently to allow a bullet to enter at the required angle. In a photograph taken by Phil Willis no more than 1.2 seconds before any non-fatal shot from the 6th floor could have been fired, the jacket can clearly be seen to be at or very close to its normal position. There's the arrows, can't I? Yeah. So
There's Kennedy looking to the right.
right
Waving,
there.
waving with his hand there, I think.
Yes, you see his hand to the right there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And right. And I think yes,
And
I
that-
cropped Willis off. He should be there. He's there, isn't he? That's him there. That's Willis. So he's taking that photograph from there.
yeah.
So it corresponds to frame 202 of the Zapruder film, and it's the photograph that was taken closest in time to the hypothetical shot from the 6th floor.
That's right, can I just interrupt
Yeah,
you?
of course you can.
See Howard Brennan looks like he's looking at the limo,
Yeah,
top left.
well, he won't look at the window, was he?
He's not looking at the window there.
No.
Myth busted.
Well, did he look up at the window before or after the shot?
He says he saw the shot fired and extended in the window. Frame 202 occurs just after half a second before frame 210, the first point at which Kennedy would have become visible to a 6th floor gunman after the tree, and 1.2 seconds before frame 224, the last frame before Kennedy is seen reacting to his throat wound. Willis himself claimed that he took the photograph in immediate response to hearing the first shot, which, if true, would be itself disprove the single bullet theory. I found a wonderful experiment some time ago in relation to all of this that I'm going to share with you now. I believe it was done by Jeremy Bourjouk, and indeed his website, 22ndNovember1963.org, is a fantastic resource, particularly for people new to the case. So Jeremy says that because of the lack of reliable documentary evidence from the autopsy, the precise location of the bullet wound in the President's back is not known. Quote, the documentary record of President Kennedy's autopsy is severely and inexcusably deficient. Consequently, the locations of none of his wounds are known with any precision. The back wound, for example, was not measured against a standard anatomical feature and was photographed with the body in a distorted position. The fundamental question of whether or not the back and throat wounds were caused by the same bullet could have been answered by dissecting the wounds and the connecting tissue, but the pathologists were ordered not to do this. That was from Fink at the Shaw trial. In the case of the bullet holes in the shirt and jacket, however, the precise locations are known, and these allow us to test the plausibility of the single bullet theory. The question is whether both garments could have ridden up sufficiently for the holes to be consistent with the shot that originated from the 6th floor and exited through the throat at the same angle in order to cause Governor Connolly's injuries. So we've got the shirt and jacket, but the hole there corresponding to the hole in the jacket. The FBI calculated the angle from the easternmost 6th floor window to Kennedy's upper back. After making allowances for the slight downward slope of the road, it was determined that any bullet fired between frame 210, the first instant in which a 6th floor gunman could have seen Kennedy, and frame 225, when Kennedy can first be seen to be injured, would have travelled downward at an average angle of 17 degrees. Jeremy represents the implications of this downward angle by using a model. President Kennedy's exact position in the car is not known, but an examination of still photographs and the Zapruder film allows the following assumptions to be safely made. Go back actually to 210. I've got 225. Kennedy's sitting with his back against the seat. His head was tilted slightly forward. His right elbow was on or just above the side of the car, a little below the level of his shoulder. His left arm was not raised.
Can you do it, Tony?
So the location of the bullet hole in the back of the jacket is 5 3/8 below the top of the collar. The hole in the back of the shirt is 5 3/4 below the top of its collar. With the garments in their normal positions, the hole in the jacket was either level with or a small fraction of an inch below the hole in the shirt. Let's go back to the Willis photograph taken at the same time as frame 202 of the Zapruder film. It shows that the jacket was in its normal position less than half a second before Kennedy came into view from the 6th floor window. It's not raised up in any way. With the shirt and jacket aligned normally, the holes are far too low for the hypothetical bullet to have come out of the throat at the required angle. The bullet holes would have to be about 4 inches higher, close to the level of the collars. Some photographs taken further down the time of the shooting than the Willis photograph show the right shoulder of the jacket slightly raised as the President waved to the crowd. Even with the arm in this position, the bullet hole is much too low. For the bullet hole to approach the level of the shirt collar, the back of the jacket would have to ride up far beyond the level shown in any photographs of Kennedy during the motorcade. When the collars of the shirt and jacket were in their normal positions, the two bullet holes were at almost exactly the same level. This suggests that if both garments had ridden up, when the bullet passed through them, they were ridden up almost exactly the same amount.
I think someone described that as, Weisberg, I think, described that as an insult to Kennedy's tailor.
Yes, exactly. Buttoned up, shirts are generally much more restricted in their movements than are jackets. Even if the jacket had ridden up sufficiently to allow a bullet to enter the President's back near the level of the collar, the shirt could not have done so. Therefore, the known location of the hole in the shirt is not consistent with the hypothetical shot from the easternmost 6-4 window that came out of Kennedy's throat. Where was the throat wound? It does make no practical difference whether this wound was located at or just above the knot of Kennedy's tie, because the balance of the evidence placed his back wound several inches lower than either location. However, the throat wound was located just below the Adam's apple and just above the knot of the tie. Dr. Charles Carrico, who saw Kennedy's throat wound before it was distorted during a tracheotomy and before the President's shirt and tie were removed, was asked to point to the location on his own throat, and it indicated it was above the tie. The Warren Commission preferred to place the bullet wound about 1 inch lower, just below the level of Kennedy's collar button, but that location is contradicted by the lack of an obvious bullet hole in the front of Kennedy's shirt and by the absence of bullet damage to his tie. Notice the slits here. There were several slits in the President's jacket, tie and shirt, but all of them are consistent with having been made in the hospital's emergency room by nurses using scalpels or scissors to free the patient's clothing. The two cuts closest to the collar of the shirt do not match each other as those caused by a bullet would have done. The cuts in the President's shirt lay directly underneath the knot of the tie, but there was no damage to the knot of the tie apart from a tiny nick on the front of the knot to the wearer's left. Material surrounding the nick was removed in order to obtain a sample for testing to see whether a bullet had deposited traces of copper. Although there were traces of copper around the bullet hole in the back of the shirt, there were none on the tie or on the front of the shirt. The damage to the tie, just like the damage to the front of the shirt, was evidently made by a surgical instrument, not by a bullet. To return to the experiment, there is no doubt that the physical dimensions of the model and the physical properties of the clothing will be slightly different to those of President Kennedy, but any such difference is not significant. It is clear that the hole in Kennedy's jacket, and especially the hole in his shirt, could not have been caused by a bullet entering his back at an angle of 700 degrees, continuing in a straight line, and coming out of the throat just below the Adam's apple. As Jeremy says, quote, "Buttoned-up shirts tend to be much less flexible than jackets. President Kennedy's shirt in particular could not have bunched up significantly. It had been made to measure, it was held in place by a belt, it had a long tail on which Kennedy was sitting, and the hot weather would have caused the shirt to stick to the President's back. The hole in the shirt lined up almost exactly with the hole in the jacket. And I would add, they line up almost exactly with the wound in the actual back, based on the preponderance of evidence. In private, the Warren Commission was keenly aware that it had a problem, to have the back wound too low to connect to a higher throat wound. In executive session dated January 1964, there is a recorded comment that, quote, "The bullet entered below the shoulder blade to the right of the backbone, which is below the place where the picture shows the bullet came out." The conclusion, therefore, to this and the experiment is that the location of the bullet holes disprove the single bullet theory. This is real science and not BS. Not garbage in, garbage out like some of the so-called scientific experiments that are supposed to prove that Oswald acted alone. We see those both in the mainstream media and online with regularity. The most famous being the computer-generated graphics used by the news networks in their documentaries over the years. Now, of course, if you want to line up the wounds in a certain way, you're going to get the conclusion you want. Kennedy was not hit high in the back of the neck, no matter how hard Dale Myers and Gerald Ford would like you to believe.
Yeah, but at least he's got an aircraft carrier in.
The best the media can do is alter the position of the bodies in the car to try to fit their hypothesis. This example shows the only way the wounds in JFK can connect is to have him leaning forward significantly, which he does not do in the Zapruder film until after he's been hit for the first time. This is a repeat of the trick first employed by the Warren Commission with Rydberg, and then the HCA docs with highly misleading medical illustrations. The next slide from a Discovery Channel documentary quite clearly shows that the correct trajectory from the back wound is through the chest rather than the throat. Indeed, if you went as far to accept a neck through and through trajectory, you still have a problem. A professor in pathology called Dr. John Nichols conducted extensive tests with Carcano ammunition and human cadavers and concluded in 1973 that a straight line from the back wound to the alleged exit in the throat had to pass directly through the hard bone of the spine. Dr. Nichols' work was fully validated in 1998 by radiation oncologist David Mantic via cross-sectional CAT scan of a patient with the same upper body dimensions as President Kennedy. Even Alan Spector, in summarising his theory to Earl Warren, wrote that the autopsy showed that a bullet had struck, quote, only soft tissue. Similarly, you have people that conduct shooting tests using plastic water containers and then try to use that as proof that the ammunition behaved the way the Warren report said it did, when actually the opposite is true, which gets me to CE399, the actual single bullet itself. Here it is, almost pristine with very little damage despite perforating skin and tissue of two people, transiting multiple layers of clothing and breaking bone. Supposedly found in a stretcher at Parkland Hospital that may or may not have belonged to Governor Connolly. Dr. Milton Halpern, former Chief Medical Examiner of New York City for 20 years and conducted more than 10,000 autopsies on gunshot victims, is quoted as saying, "I cannot accept the premise that this bullet thrashed around in all that bony tissue and lost only 1.4 to 2.4 grains of its original weight. I cannot believe either that this bullet is going to emerge miraculously unscathed, without any deformity, and with its lines and grooves intact. You must remember that next to bone, the skin offers greater resistance to a bullet in its course through the body than any other kind of tissue. The single bullet theory asks us to believe that this bullet went through 7 layers of skin, tough, elastic, resistant skin. This bullet passed through other layers of soft tissue and then shattered bones. I just can't believe this bullet had the force to do what the Commission has demanded of it. And I don't think they've really stopped to think about that carefully, what they've asked of this bullet."
Do you know how many grams
It's grains, but
grains
Yeah,
were in Connolly's body?
I think
We're going to touch on that.
Can we touch it next?
more than that anyway.
That's what I was...
Yeah. The next slide is one of my most favourite in the whole case. This bullet is CE399.
Yeah.
The others are all the result of firing tests. The one that was fired through a human wrist is this. It looks nothing like CE399. The other two were fired in the cotton wadding and a water tank. Well, 3. I can't remember what that one is. These are the, I think those are the,
That's the water tank.
that's the water tank and that's the cotton wadding. Yeah.
This is exactly what CE399 is, really, isn't it?
Which one looks most like this, precisely? Those two do. Well, remember that next time you watch a clip of people supposedly similar in the shooting in Dealey Plaza, where they come up with a 6.5mm round that looks like that. And remember what I said earlier about Governor Connally's surgeons in relation to his wounds. When the Warren Commission showed them CE399, none believed it could have passed through the radius bone of Connally's wrist. The Governor's wrist surgeon, Dr. Charles Gregory, explained in his testimony the amount of cloth and debris carried into the wrist indicated it had been struck by, quote, an irregular missile. and that there was more debris left in Connolly than is missing from the bullet. Further evidence also suggests that a separate bullet causing the governor's wrist and thigh injuries is likely to be correct. Army wound ballistic experts concluded that those wounds were, quote, not caused by a pristine bullet, and therefore bullet CE-399 could not have caused all his wounds. At Edgewood Arsenal, the Commission's experts fired bullets through the wrists of human cadavers, and Dr. Alfred Olivier later testified to having closely replicated the entrance and exit wounds to Connolly's wrist, but when asked to compare the condition of the test bullet which created the wound to that of CE-399, he noted, quote, "It is not like it at all. I mean, Commission Exhibit 399 is not flattened at the end. This one is very severely flattened at the end." And remember, the Warren Commission also had to line up not only Kennedy's back and throat wounds, but also Connolly's back wound. The Commission's own reconstruction demonstrated that the only way this could be done was by placing Kennedy's back wound too high and his throat wound too low. Now, bullets don't always move in straight lines. They can and sometimes do change direction, particularly if they hit a bone after entering the body. But if you accept that premise and suggest that the bullet moved on an upward trajectory, it cannot then drop in mid-air to hit Governor Connolly in the back. As Warren Commission apologists are fond of saying, he was in a jump seat, sat lower in the car than Kennedy. A roller coaster without tracks comes to mind. But there are other rebuttals beyond bunching. First, the jacket flap. Frame 224 of the Zapruder film shows the right lapel of Connolly's jacket flipping outward. The Warren Commission apologists try to say that this movement is caused by the same bullet as President Kennedy's throat wound, but it isn't possible. Firstly, the bullet that passed through the front of Connolly's jacket did so several inches from the lapel. Secondly, too much time elapsed between Kennedy's throat wound and Connolly's lapel flap. The minimum time for a neurological reaction to an external stimulus is 200 milliseconds, or between 3 and 4 frames of the Zapruder film. Because frame 224 shows Kennedy's hands already moving to his throat, the wound to which he is responding cannot have occurred any later than frame 221. A hypothetical bullet fired from the rifle found on the 6th floor would have travelled at least 400 feet between the time of Kennedy's throat wound and the time of Connolly's lapel flap. The distance between Kennedy and Connolly was about 3 feet. It was a windy day in Dealey Plaza, as evidenced by the flags on the limousine, and the flapping of Connolly's lapel was probably caused by nothing more sinister than that. Next, there is the claim that CE-399 appears relatively undamaged because it tumbled, lost velocity, and struck Connolly side on. This is according to the urologist John Latimer, and he really takes the piss. Quote, "When it exited the president, it began tumbling, and that is evident by the elongated entry wound on the governor's back. The wound of entry into Connolly's back was 3 centimetres long, 1 1/4 inches long, the exact length of bullet 399. This claim that the bullet was already tumbling when it struck Connolly is doubly useful for Commission apologists, not only because it can be used to slow 399 down, but it also suggests the bullet had been destabilised by striking something else before it hit Connolly. But the original wound in Governor Connolly's back was not 3 centimetres in length. Rather, as Connolly's thoracic surgeon Dr. Robert Shaw explained to the Warren Commission, 3 centimetres was the length of the wound after it was surgically enlarged. Its original size was only 1.5 centimetres, half the length of Latimer claimed it was. Shaw's testimony is proven to be accurate by the holes in Governor Connolly's jacket and shirt, which measured 1.7 centimetres and 1.3 centimetres respectively. Of course, at 1.5 centimetres, the wound would still be considered somewhat elongated, but this does not by itself constitute evidence that the bullet was tumbling. As Millicent Craner has pointed out, the wound in the back of Kennedy's scalp also measured 1.5 centimetres in length, and no one suggested that the bullet which caused it was tumbling. Rather, as Dr. Shaw explained, the type of elongated or elliptical wound seen in the governor's back often occurs when the bullet enters at a right angle or a tangent. If it enters at a tangent, there will be some length to the wound of entrance. Dr. Shaw did not believe that the bullet was tumbling as it passed through the governor's chest and made special note of, quote, the neat way in which it stripped the rib out without doing much damage to the muscles that lay on either side of it. Further support for Shaw's contention comes from the aforementioned experiment the Discovery Channel conducted for its 2004 television special JFK Beyond the Magic Bullet. The Discovery Channel's bullet tumbled its way through the Connolly torso and in doing so struck 2 ribs, not 1. Furthermore, the test provided additional support for the case against this SBT when their bullet emerged severely bent, looking drastically different to 399. To paraphrase Jeremy Bourgeois, the bottom line is that the single bullet theory is not only unsupported by the evidence, it is actively contradicted by the evidence. When the actual wound locations and trajectories are recognised and used in experiments, then theory becomes impossibility, as a recent computer project has shown. Not Laboratory, an industry leader in forensic engineering and animation for more than 40 years, was commissioned to create a digital reconstruction of the assassination to test the single bullet theory and released their findings in advance of the 60th anniversary. To quote Stanley Stoll, CEO and principal engineer of Not Laboratory, our team tested bullet trajectories using the 2 frames from the Zapruder film where the first shots occurred and the known entry and exit points on Kennedy and Connolly. The shooting position, bullet exit point on President Kennedy and entry point on Governor Connolly should all be reasonably in line. When drawing this line from the 6th floor perch of the Texas Book Depository to the positions of the 2 men and their entry-exit points, we found a significant angle difference. The case is ongoing, but evidence strongly suggests there is more to the story in this historic event. Modern science refutes the Warren Commission findings on the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Real science, not BS.
Quite right, too.
Thank you.
Do you have an opinion on how many times Connolly was shot?
Probably at least twice. I do think there's been less made of the fact that he could have been hit by the fragments from the headshot, which doesn't really get brought up very much, because obviously you had the broken half bullet with the fragments in the front seat, which potentially could have hit him. The idea that you've got he was certainly hit by separate. Whether you would count that as him being shot, it's whether struck. Yes, yeah, that's right. Yeah, and you may find the wrist wound because the trajectories don't line up, and the damage doesn't line up. So you may find that something that ended in his thigh is not the same as what hit him on the wrist. And I don't think that there hasn't been a lot of, certainly not that I've seen, a lot of
well, we don't have
literature on that.
I mean, there's all the problem with the number of fragments, number of bullets. You've got the dent on the chrome. You've got the witnesses that saw a hole,
Do the windshield,
you know, pristine hole at Parkland,
which a pencil
which a pencil would go through. On the windscreen, you've got the crack on the windscreen. I mean, it's a mess, isn't it? I mean, it's consistent with potential. I mean, again, we don't know because things break up.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's not inconceivable that there's multiple shots here.
Well, the quote is a flurry of shells in the car. Well, that's not 2 shots, is it? A flurry is more than 2. I mean, someone like Casey Quinlan, I think, said on one of the Zooms recently, he thought there was 10. Our friend Leroy Bluins, remember him? I think he was a dozen, you know. I'd lean towards that's too
Mike's
many.
5.
I'm more towards Mike, I would say, about half a dozen rather than a dozen.
Well,
but
yes, I mean, I rely both on the witnesses when properly interpreted and the acoustic recording. They actually agree very closely on the number of shots and their spacing and their origins.
Yeah, I think there's probably 6, but you can debate it either way, so in terms of the acoustics. I found, I was going to bring that up, but I mean, even that's probably too high, the knotted,
Yeah,
slightly too high, but it's far better than
There.
that Myers and various others have used, but it's better. And the good thing about it is they've got Connolly in the right place where he's in set as well, because that's the other thing they always go on about. Is when you line them up with that very early slide that I put up, when apologists say, oh well, all these photograph images, they show Connolly sat at the same level, right? And that's
He's
wrong.
low,
He
he's
was
lower
lower down and he was
yeah.
inside of the car. So that's what not have done. He's clearly in the right position, and he still doesn't line up.
Yeah, and all the pictures show him leaning on the.
Kennedy's
glass.
up. Kennedy's up.
And
Yes,
Connolly was. They were both up to the door.
It was the physical seat was
the
slightly
physical
in.
seat that he leant.
Yeah.
Connolly leant
Yeah,
over.
because when you see him with the steps
Yeah.
and holding it's not as.
Yeah, they used the jump seat as an excuse to make the bullets line up. That's right.
That,
That doesn't fit. But then the idea that it comes in that angle, or that then it goes up there because it hits some bony structure, and then it comes down again. How? When I showed to the team at work, they were like incredulous that how anybody could take that seriously. I'm like, well, yeah, no.
But I think 399 is probably the most absurd piece of evidence. I mean, it's the thing that if you're ever going to waver over this,
Yeah.
that's the thing that just blows the Warren report apart, doesn't it?
I was watching a YouTube clip, and he was obviously a gun nut in America, and he had all these plastic water things, and he's like, obviously I can't shoot a real human being, so this is the best that I've come up with.
Wouldn't it? Trump, maybe?
And so he shoots there, and he pouring all the water out, and then he comes up with the bullet. He's like, oh, no, this is exactly like 399. Well, yeah, of course it looks like 399 because they did this in the 60s, shooting through water.
But the London Weekend trial, they did all this with Cyril Wex. Do you remember seeing all that? I mean, that was just again, a no-brainer, wasn't it?
But, and that's only through one bullet.
Yeah.
Regarding the wrist wound in Governor Connolly, James Humes and Pierre Think were asked during their testimony in the Warren Commission if CE 399 could have caused the wound in the governor's wrist, and both of them said no.
No, that's right. They didn't say maybe, maybe not. They said no.
It's emphatic.
They were ignored.
If the throat shot was a front shot,
Yeah.
where did the bullet go?
And that's the problem.
That's your problem.
That is always the problem. Where did it go?
That's why I think it was a fragment from the headshot.
And it could well be. But that's the other thing, the whole idea that the ammunition behaved differently. One supposedly hits his head and shatters, whereas the other one goes through both bodies and into the wrist and then comes out. So how anybody with any
and also
common sense can think that
the small hole at the back, this whole yawning, is it called yawning? What's it called?
Yawing.
Where it tumbles.
Yeah, it tumbles, yeah.
I mean, that's a convenient explanation, isn't it?
Well, the other, Pat Spear has a brilliant piece about the idea, but the whole thing with you could feel the end of the wound, so it didn't go anywhere. Then Spector goes on about, oh, well, it went through the strap muscles. Well, the strap muscles are at the front of the throat, they're not at the back, so there's nothing for it to go through.
I think President Kennedy's autopsy is possibly the only autopsy in history where a procedure is done and there is more questions than there is before the procedure
Yes.
is done. An autopsy is supposed to reveal how the person died. In the case of President Kennedy, it doesn't reveal anything because they never dissected any of the wounds. As Harold Weisberg said, the president got an autopsy fit for a Bowery bum, and Oswald got an autopsy fit for a president.
But that bullet found by Landis was actually on the ledge.
Yeah.
It wasn't on the seat.
No.
So it was, the sort of ledge where the metal and the rear kind of meet, and the sort of leather of the seat in that section. Which is, it's possible that, in all the sort of whole trauma that,
Well, the bullet
it just fell out and rested
It's
there.
possible.
But he also picked up a couple of fragments as well, he said. It wasn't just
the astonishing thing that he found, so he says now, is that nobody was guarding the limousine. So he didn't want any souvenir hunters to.
Why would a bullet just go into your back and then drop out there? I don't understand.
Well, defective load,
I'm
possibly.
talking about some of the bullets fired from a gun with a silencer. I don't know if that makes any difference. I don't know.
I-
how true.
Why would they use
No.
a silencer?
I don't know.
The modern silencers, that isn't an issue, but 60 years ago, apparently it would make a less of a, it would slow the bullet down.
If you only wanted 3 shots, and you fired 2 shots that nobody could hear,
Well,
it's all got 3 shots, haven't you?
That is an argument. And I think also there's where some of the witnesses said the first shot sounded different to the first 2 as well, so that could have been a faulty round, and a faulty round may have not penetrated.
Lots of people talk about a firecracker noise,
Yes.
don't they? I don't know if that's relevant or not, but
Oh, it could,
but obviously, it's, at the turn, and sort of around where the Towner film is,
yes.
the Houston Elm turn, where there's obviously some missing frames in that film, it jumps.
Well, a lot of the more modern Warren Commission apologists do make the argument for a much earlier shot before the tree.
Which therefore it doesn't come into play as a problem. Yeah.
Or
for
from
for Canterbury, we're taking Canterbury.
the acoustic analysis didn't establish for sure that the rifle was fired only from the Texas School Depository. The Daltex building would have produced very similar
Yes.
impulses on the recording.
And would the records
I
build
think-
the roof as well?
I think Mike's got a question,
Well, Mike.
and then I'll ask a question
Okay,
after Mike.
well, Mike.
Better be good now.
Thank you, John.
Better be a good one.
What's your view on there's a theory that, supported by Mark Rubert and others, that would partially explain the wounds on Colony, is that there was a shooter on the roof of Texas School Depository in the corner, the opposite end to the so-called sniper's nest, because there was a rifle found up there. And because the angle is so steep, the way Connolly was hit, like in his thigh, and that would also dispel the single bullet theory with another shooter there. What do you think of that?
You go back to that D.B. Clarkson model with the slide.
Yeah, the previous one.
Yeah, so have you mean the southwest corner roof? Is that
Yeah,
what you're saying,
yeah.
Mike?
Yeah,
Wasn't there someone on that?
No,
on the
the
depository.
TSBD.
on the
Oh.
TSBD. and
Left,
because-
left, there.
there, because it's a slightly steeper angle as well, and it's beyond the tree, the oak tree, and the sign, and it's a bit more of a steep angle. That could explain some of the wounds on Connolly without the need for the single bullet. What's your take on that? I mean, obviously it's speculation.
It
like a lot.
depends who you read. The reason I went up there, because I thought that was where you were saying, because
I
I
thought there
think
was somebody on there, wasn't
that's where they found the
The bullet.
Wasn't it shit?
the
The
case,
cartridge.
the
The
cartridge.
sheriff
They
there,
found
he
a
was up there with a
cartridge,
gun.
but they found a rifle on the roof of the
There was somebody up there.
Texas School Depository. Found a British Enfield 303.
Oh.
Well, that was the idea, because that's what Fraser owned. So there was the.
Yeah, but how did it get up
They were
there?
good. Well,
Oh, trying to fit
they
it.
were going to fit up. They were going to fit up Fraser. I mean, it
It
depends.
doesn't
who you
have
read.
to be the roof, does it, Mike? Can it not be the southwest corner
Well,
of the
the
set?
people saw people.
Yeah, they saw people at the end of the 6th floor,
Yeah.
the other end, didn't they?
Yeah.
In that
That's-
window there.
that is-
This one.
yes.
And you've got a photograph of that head and shoulders of someone that has kind of like a widow's peak.
Yeah.
It looks like
It's a
the,
bit-
the bigger Oswald, if we can want to slip into that territory, but
Yeah,
you know,
the Mexico was.
Yeah. Have you
and the other position.
That's
Have
the
you-
sixth floor there, isn't
Well,
it?
The other position is
sheriff on the top of that other building, you know, the one,
Yeah, the Deltex.
Yeah,
not that one, the one next to
Yeah,
it.
got that one. too.
Oh, well, other than, so
Yeah.
did somebody
Yeah.
say that they were up there with the
Yeah,
gun?
possibly.
Well, that was the jail.
It was
There were,
that,
Right.
there were prisoners in the jail.
Could you
Across
get
and
up
saw
the
them.
video? It's a very short video of Dr. Joseph Dolce, who was the wind ballistics expert for the US Army, who supervised the ballistic tests for the Warren Commission. That'd be very interesting to play, I think, for these guys here, because he was the man that conducted the tests, and he was the guy that, obviously, with the bullets that you had on your screen there. So I can get you the, if you type into YouTube, if you type into YouTube, Reasonable Doubt by Chip Selby. See if it comes up. There, okay? Reasonable Doubt by Chip Selby. And go and skip to 42:17.
Oh, blimey.
I wanna-
Sure.
Yeah, well, I mean,
We have to be precise.
this is what I wrote in my Assassination 60 articles. Here we go. So maybe just play it for there.
Cool.
There's Cyril.
That's okay.
That's close enough.
Have you got any sound? Headphone.
Governor Connolly is, as I have already explained, essentially pristine.
No, it could not have caused all the wounds,
Yeah.
because our experiments have showed beyond any doubt that merely shooting the wrist deformed the bullet drastically, and yet this bullet came out as almost a perfectly normal, pristine bullet.
Dr. Joseph Dolce was the chief consultant in wound ballistics for the U.S. Army, who supervised these tests for the Warren Commission.
And so they gave us the original rifle, the Mannlicher Carcano, plus 100 bullets, 6.5 millimeters. And we went and we shot the cadaver wrist, as I've just mentioned, and in every instance, the front or the tip of the bullet was smashed. It's impossible for a bullet to strike a bone, even at low velocity, and still come with a perfectly normal tip. The tip of this bullet was absolutely not deformed in no instance whatsoever, in no amount. Under no circumstances do I feel that this bullet could hit the wrist and still not be deformed. We proved that by experiments.
The undamaged condition of bullet 399 presented the Commission with still another dilemma. While 399 appeared to be completely intact, the bullet which struck Governor Connolly left fragments of metal in all 3 of the governor's wounds. The bullet left identifiable pieces of itself radiologically. That is, you can see them on x-rays in Kennedy's chest, in Connolly's chest, Connolly's wrist, and Connolly's thigh. So we've got 4 anatomic locations in these 2 men where pieces of the bullet, albeit quite small, but visible to the naked eye without any special enhancement photographic techniques, can be seen. There's no way that all those pieces could have come from the bullet, and yet had the bullet lose only 1 to 1.5% of its total weight, which is exactly what it was found to have lost. The bullet, as found, weighed 158.6 grains. In its pristine state, it weighs no more than 161 grains.
I think even when you see the bullet, some of the loss from it is from the FBI
Yeah.
taking pieces
samples
out of
for
it
spectroscopy.
to do the spectro. Yeah, so even that's misleading.
Yeah, those little nubbins on
Yeah.
the.
I don't. It probably won't surprise you when I tell you this, but Dr. Joseph Dolce wasn't called to testify before the
Of
Warren
course he
Commission, but he was the one that ran the test for them. But because what he was saying totally destroyed the single bullet theory in the condition of CE399, we never called them.
All right, well, that was very good, Paul. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
that
you.
was-